On August 28, 2021, Taliban fighters came to a folk singer's farm in the Andarab Valley. They drank tea with him first, then they shot him in the head. His name was Fawad, and his crime was singing. But the next thing they came for wasn't music. It was every woman in Afghanistan, one law at a time. The first day was August 15th. On August 15th, 2021, President Ashraf Ghani grabbed what he could carry and flew out of Kabul in a helicopter. By that evening, Taliban fighters were already sitting in his palace, taking selfies. The next morning, the whole world was watching what was happening outside Kabul airport. You've probably seen the videos. Thousands of people crushed against a razor wire wall, holding up passports, holding up children, screaming to anyone in a uniform to please take them. A US Marine reached over that wall and lifted a baby with one hand. The baby's name was Sohail Ahmadi, and she was 2 months old. Her father, Mirza Ali Ahmadi, had worked security at the American embassy. He handed his daughter to a stranger because he thought he'd be right behind her, and he turned out to be wrong. The crowd surged, the Taliban pushed everyone back, and by the time he made it inside, his baby was gone. He wouldn't see her again for 5 months. A British officer told Sky News something that night that he couldn't shake. Women were throwing their babies over the razor wire. Some of the babies got caught on the wire. His soldiers were crying, and he was counselling them, because none of them had ever seen a mother do that before, and none of them understood yet why she would. They understood a few days later. Because 200 miles north of Kabul, in a mountain valley called Andarab, a folk singer named Fawad was drinking tea with Taliban fighters at his farm. Fawad played the gichak, an old Afghan string instrument, and he sang about the mountains he grew up in. The Taliban had already announced music was forbidden in Islam. They visited Fawad once, drank his tea, searched his home, and left. Then on August 28th, they came back. His son Jawad said they shot his father in the head on the farm. There was no arrest, no explanation, just a bullet on a Friday in the country he'd sung about his whole life. Zabihullah Mujahid, the Taliban's chief spokesman, told the world that week that things would be different this time. Women's rights, he said, would be respected under Islamic law. However, the Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice was already moving into the same building the Ministry of Women's Affairs used to occupy. The old sign was being taken down, and the first list of new rules was already being printed. Then came the first list. Within a few weeks of taking Kabul, the Taliban started publishing decrees, not all at once. Piece by piece, because that's how you boil a country without anyone jumping out of the pot. First, the Ministry of Women's Affairs was quietly dissolved. In its place, they resurrected the Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, which is the same ministry that ran the whip patrols in the 1990s. Then in September 2021, boys were told to return to secondary school. Girls were told to stay home, and that was really all it took. No public announcement was made, no timeline was given, no explanation was offered. Just an empty hallway where the girls should have been. Zarifa Ghafari, who we'll come back to in a minute, watched it happen from Germany and said she went numb. In December 2021, women were banned from travelling more than 75 kilometres without a male relative, called a mahram. If a woman needed to see a doctor in the next town, her brother had to go with her. And if she didn't have a brother, she wasn't going. By March 2022, the promise the Taliban had made about reopening secondary schools was just gone. Female staff at government offices were told to send in a male relative to work in their place for a fraction of the salary. In November, they closed the parks. These were parks with swings and picnic benches, places kids went. Women were banned outright, and gyms and public baths were shut alongside them. Then, in December 2022, Kabul University's main gates were locked to women. Female students who showed up were turned away in tears, cameras rolling. That same month, all Afghan women working for national and international NGOs were ordered to stay home. Which meant, in a country where 45% of the population needs humanitarian aid, half the aid workers were gone overnight. UN officials estimated the annual loss at $1 billion, or 5% of what Afghanistan's economy still produced. In April 2023, they extended that ban to Afghan women working for the United Nations itself. By July, beauty salons got a 1-month notice to shut. 60,000 women worked in those salons. For most of them, it was the only paycheck at home, because husbands couldn't find work either. The Taliban explanation was that eyebrow threading is un-Islamic, and that wedding grooms shouldn't have to pay for the bride's hair anymore. You might notice a pattern. Every time the world stopped paying attention, another door closed, and behind those doors, women were starting to disappear. That's when the men she'd jailed came looking. Before the Taliban rolled into Kabul on that August day, Afghanistan had roughly 250 female judges. These were the women who had spent their careers sending rapists to jail, granting divorces to women whose husbands beat them, and putting Taliban fighters in prison for setting off bombs. That week, as the fighters entered the city, they opened every prison door in the country. Every murderer, every rapist, every convicted Taliban commander walked out into the street with their sentence torn up, and every face in the courtroom still fresh in their head. By midnight, the phone calls started. There's a woman the BBC called Masuma, not her real name. She'd sentenced hundreds of men in her career for murder, rape, and torture. One man she'd found guilty of murdering his wife had leaned toward her at sentencing and said, "When I get out of prison, I will do to you what I did to my wife." She hadn't taken him seriously. When the Taliban opened his cell, he called her many times, told her he'd pulled her file from the court office, and told her he was coming. There's another woman, Al Jazeera, called Najiba. She'd once sentenced a man to 10 years for beating his own sister into a coma. That man promised her in open court that when he got out, he'd do the same thing to her. This year he called too. More than 220 of these women went into hiding. They burned their court robes, deleted their photos, and moved every few weeks to new safe houses. Another judge, called Nasima, had a 21-year-old daughter who got leukemia while they were in hiding. She couldn't take her to a hospital because the Taliban would recognize her. Her daughter died at home. Nasima said afterward, "I didn't want my daughter to die because of my job." However, that was the choice the Taliban had left her. The killings weren't only quiet ones. On October 20th, 2021, a 29-year-old economics lecturer named Frozan Safi got a call from an unknown number in Mazar-i-Sharif. "Bring your documents," the voice said. "Germany is processing your asylum papers." She grabbed her degree and her scarf and left. 2 weeks later, her body was found in a house on the outskirts of the city, along with 3 other women. Her sister Rita, who worked as a doctor, identified her by her clothes. Because Frozan's face was gone. Her name was Zarifa. In 2018, a 26-year-old woman named Zarifa Ghafari became the mayor of a conservative town called Maidan Shar, an hour west of Kabul. She was the youngest mayor Afghanistan had ever elected, and her first day in office, a crowd of men surrounded her building and screamed at her to resign, but she refused to leave. Which is when the Taliban started trying to kill her. The first assassination attempt failed. So did the second. The third time, they came right up to the wall of her home. When they realized they still couldn't get to her, they changed the target. On November 15th, 2020, they shot her father, retired Colonel Abdul Wasi Ghafari, dead in front of his own house. Zarifa said later that she believes they killed her father because they couldn't kill her. She said her father used to tell her, "Stand your ground, don't back down." She stayed in office. When the Taliban rolled into Kabul on August 15th of 2021, armed men came to her house looking for her. They didn't find her, so they beat her security guard nearly to death. Zarifa was hiding a few streets away. To reach the airport, she got into a car, curled herself into the footwell so no one at the Taliban checkpoints could see her through the window, and rode for hours pretending to be luggage. She made it out on a flight to Germany, one of the lucky ones. Most of the women who ran government offices, radio stations, girls' schools, and health clinics didn't have a foreign passport or a European ambassador on speed dial, so they stayed in place, and they watched what happened next. In the months after Kabul fell, the Taliban went door to door in smaller towns and villages. UN investigators later collected account after account of women forced to sign papers promising to stay indoors, husbands ordered to control their wives, and neighborhoods warned that if she was seen outside without a mahram, everyone got punished, which turned every neighbor into a guard. Zabihullah Mujahid, on Twitter, kept telling the world that women in Afghanistan were free. He posted this on International Women's Day in 2025, and by then, the sound of a woman's own voice had already been made illegal in the country. In August of 2024, they made it law. For 3 years, the rules had been announced through decrees, through press releases, through phone calls to district governors. Then, on August 21, 2024, the Ministry of Vice and Virtue published a 114-page document, 35 articles long. This was the law on the propagation of virtue and the prevention of vice. And this was the moment every crushing rule they'd been enforcing became officially the law of Afghanistan. Article 13 says a woman must cover her whole body in public, including her face, and her clothing cannot be thin, tight, or short. She has to cover herself even in front of non-Muslim women, in case she corrupts them. A woman is forbidden from looking at any man she's not related to by blood or marriage. That's the visible part. Article 13 also says a woman's voice is awrat, which is the Arabic word for a private, intimate part of the body, meaning her voice is genitalia. She cannot sing in public, or recite the Quran in public, or read out loud in public. The morality inspectors are told, in writing, to prevent the sound of a woman's voice from leaving a home. In October of that same year, Khalid Hanafi, the acting Vice and Virtue Minister, went further in a voice message to his ministry. Even when a woman is praying alone at home, he said, and another woman walks past, she must not pray loud enough for the other woman to hear. Rosa Otunbayeva, who runs the UN mission in Afghanistan, called the whole law a distressing vision for the country. Ravina Shamdasani at the OHCHR said the Taliban was trying to turn Afghan women into faceless, voiceless shadows. However, the enforcement was already routine. In the first 3 months of 2025 alone, UNAMA documented more than 180 public floggings for the offences of adultery and homosexuality. 30 of the victims were women. The floggings happened in stadiums and public squares, attended by Taliban officials, in a ceremony that used to happen in this same country during the 1990s, with the same whip in roughly the same hand. But the rules kept coming. By September of 2025, Taliban security forces stopped Afghan women from entering United Nations offices at all, even the women who worked there. In January of 2026, the tens of thousands of women government workers who'd been sent home in 2021 on reduced salaries were told their salaries were cancelled and their jobs were gone. Volker Turk at the UN called it a cascade of edicts, crushing an entire population. Nothing about it was new, and it was all just the paperwork catching up. Behind the door of a Kabul prison sat a woman named Elaha. Even before the Vice and Virtue law turned silence into the law of the land, the punishment for a woman's voice was already brutal, and nobody paid that price harder than the women who protested. The first big protest happened on August 17th, 2021, just 2 days after Kabul fell. A small group of women marched through the capital chanting 3 words: bread, work, freedom. That slogan became a movement. On August 13th, 2022, on the 1-year anniversary of the takeover, about 40 women marched in front of the Education Ministry. Taliban fighters fired guns in the air and beat them with rifle butts. In July 2023, 50 women marched against the beauty salon ban. Security forces broke it up with fire hoses, tasers, and warning shots. One salon owner on Butcher Street, in the middle of the fire hoses, held up a sign that read, "Don't take my bread and water." Then the hose hit her. Wahida Amiri, one of the protest leaders, later described what happened when she was detained. She said the Taliban brought dozens of soldiers, used electric shocks on the protesters, and pointed guns at their heads. All the while, they were screaming, "How much money have the Western bitches paid you to make this riot?" Wahida said she froze, but told the other women to sit down on the ground, and they did. None of that, however, was the worst of it. In August 2022, a young woman named Elaha Delawazai posted a video from Kabul. Elaha was a medical student. Her father had been a general in the previous government's intelligence service. In the video, she said Qari Saeed Kosti, the former spokesman for the Taliban's interior ministry, had forced her to marry him, raped her every night, beaten her every night, and threatened her with a video he'd filmed. She said, through tears, "After I publish this, maybe no one will see me alive again, but to die once is better than dying 1,000 times." She tried to escape to Pakistan. Taliban officials caught her at the Torkham border crossing. In July 2024, The Guardian and the outlet Rukhsana Media reported on another video. This one had been filmed inside a Taliban prison. In it, a female human rights activist was gang-raped by 2 armed guards. That video was later sent to her as a message, telling her to shut up, which was the point, because the entire law, from the whip in the stadium to the phone in the prison, only worked if women learned to be silent. But most of them refused to be. A place called Sharak-e-Sabzi sells its daughters. The real cost of every one of these laws didn't land on the mayor in Germany. It landed on a village called Sharak-e-Sabz, 30 minutes outside the western city of Herat. Photographer Stephanie Sinclair and the organization, too young to wed, spent months in that village. They found 118 girls who had already been sold as child brides, and another 116 families who had listed their daughters for sale and were waiting for a buyer. The going rate for a girl was around $2,000, which was enough food for the rest of the family for 1 year. The Guardian went back to that region this year with the reporter Nida Noran, working alongside the Afghan outlet Zan Times. At one hospital in the north of the country, medics had recorded 42 girls under 18 giving birth in the first 5 months of the year alone. 2 of the mothers died. Some girls, they discovered, had already been promised in infancy, with paperwork saying they would be handed over to their husband on the day they turned 7 or 8 or 9. The Taliban, in December of 2021, had actually issued a decree banning forced marriage. Then, in 2025, they issued a new decree that quietly deleted every mention of a minimum marriage age. The old republic had criminalized marriage under 15, but the new law didn't say anything at all, and those families weren't just poor. They'd been squeezed dry. Every legal way for a woman in that village to bring in money had already been shut off, so the only thing left that had a price was a daughter. Then in December 2024, the Taliban's supreme leader, Hibatullah Akhundzada, personally ordered the last educational door for women to be locked. Medical training institutes were shut to female students. The country would train no more female nurses, no more midwives, no more dental technicians, no more lab workers. In a country where women in many provinces are legally forbidden from being treated by male doctors, the Taliban had just cut the pipeline of female doctors at the neck. One student in Badakhshan, told to leave her class in tears, screamed at a Taliban official, "You told us to wear the hijab, and we obeyed. What more do you want from us? Should we just kill ourselves? Give us the poison." But in basements across Afghanistan, girls are still learning. Across the country, in basements, in back rooms of shops, in houses disguised as religious schools, thousands of teachers have been quietly holding class since 2021. A former school principal called Faranaz, in a northeastern province, started teaching classes for girls in her own living room after her school was locked. There's another, a former math teacher called Zainab, who was in medical school the day Kabul fell, and now runs classes for teenage girls from a hidden room. In Helmand, the Taliban's own home turf, a teacher, CBS called Sherin, holds 2 shifts a day, 40 students each, funded by the Pohana Fund. Some teachers say local Taliban officials actually tip them off before the auditors come. The program called Secret Scholars Online launched in August 2024 to teach 95 girls entirely over the internet. Its next round aimed for 300, some working toward international exams. The cost has been staggering. A survey published this year found 68% of Afghan women describing their mental health as bad or very bad. 8% said they personally knew a woman or girl who had tried to kill herself. In December of 2024, a young midwifery student called Fatima was turned away from her college gate for the first time. She went home and swallowed a handful of pills, then woke up in a hospital with her mother sitting next to the bed. Fatima lived, but some of her classmates did not survive. That same month, at a locked medical school in Badakhshan, another group of young women stood outside their gate and did the only thing they had left. They opened their mouths and sang. The song was called Bia Baman Asman Geria Kon, which in English means, "Come, O sky, weep with me," which was itself illegal because the Vice and Virtue law had banned a woman's voice from carrying past a wall, and they sang anyway. Then, on July 8, 2025, something happened that Afghan women had been begging for since the takeover. The International Criminal Court in The Hague issued arrest warrants for the Taliban's supreme leader, Hibatullah Akhundzada, and its Chief Justice, Abdul Hakim Haqqani. Their charge was crimes against humanity, on gender grounds. That was the first time in the history of that court that anyone had ever been charged with hunting women just for being women. Zabihullah Mujahid called the warrants nonsense. However, Afghan women in exile called it the first bill the Taliban had ever been handed, and they said the bill would keep growing. Watching a video like this keeps their names alive, so subscribe to hear the ones we still haven't reached, because silence is exactly what the Taliban is counting on.